The ship moved through the darkness of space like a small silver fish swimming through an endless ocean. And inside that ship stood a woman who carried the hopes of 8 billion people on her shoulders. Ambassador Elena Vasquez pressed her hand against the cold window and watched the stars pass by, each one a reminder of how far humanity had come and how much further they still needed to go. She was 52 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and lines on her face that told stories of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. And today she would face the greatest challenge of her entire career. The Galactic Council awaited her on Thalrix Prime, a neutral world where the 12 most powerful species in the galaxy gathered to decide the fate of civilizations. And humanity had finally been granted permission to speak before them. "Ambassador, we are approaching the station," said Captain Morrison from behind her. His voice steady, but she could hear the tension underneath it. Elena turned and nodded at the young officer who commanded the diplomatic vessel, and she tried to give him a reassuring smile, even though her own heart was pounding like a drum inside her chest. "Thank you, Captain," she said. "Let us hope they listen to reason." But even as she spoke those words, a cold feeling settled in her stomach, because she had read the intelligence reports and she knew what they were walking into. For the past 15 years, the Velnoxy hegemony had been attacking human colonies on the edge of explored space, and thousands of innocent people had died in their raids. The Velnoxy were reptilian creatures who stood over 7 feet tall, with scales the color of dry blood and eyes that showed no mercy. And they considered themselves hunters of the highest order. They did not attack humanity because they needed resources or territory. They attacked because they enjoyed it, because hunting intelligent prey was considered sport among their kind colony. After colony had sent distress signals back to Earth, begging for help as Velnoxy warships descended from the sky, and humanity's small defense fleet had tried to respond, but they were outmatched in every way. The Velnoxy had been traveling among the stars for 10,000 years, while humanity had only discovered faster than light travel 3 decades ago. And that gap in technology meant that human ships were destroyed before they could even fire their weapons. Earth needed allies. Earth needed protection. And the only place to find such things was the Galactic Council. Shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Thalrix Prime, and Elena watched the alien city rise up to meet them. Towers of crystal and metal that reached toward the purple sky like fingers grasping for the heavens. She had studied images of this place for months, but seeing it in person took her breath away. And for a moment she allowed herself to feel wonder instead of fear. The shuttle landed on a platform, surrounded by guards from a dozen different species. And Elena straightened her uniform and prepared to step out into a world that had never seen a human ambassador before. "Whatever happens in there," she said to her small staff of 3 assistants, "remember that we represent all of humanity. Every person on Earth is counting on us to bring them hope." Her assistants nodded with determined faces, and together they walked down the ramp and into the alien air of Thalrix Prime. The council chamber was a massive circular room with seats arranged in rising tiers like an ancient amphitheater. And at the center stood a single podium where those who wished to address the council would make their case. Elena walked to that podium with her head held high, even though she could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching her every move, judging her. Measuring her worth above her sat the 12 high chancellors, each one representing a species that had shaped galactic civilization for thousands of years. There was Zorvith of the Kethari Dominion, a towering insectoid creature with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the light like shattered mirrors. And he served as the head of the council. Beside him sat representatives of the Mulvari Federation, the Vexian Empire, the Groth Collective, and 8 other powers whose names Elena had memorized in preparation for this moment. And in the shadows of the upper tiers, she spotted the Velnoxy delegation, their red scales gleaming and their thin lips curved into what might have been smiles. Elena took a deep breath and began to speak. Honored members of the Galactic Council, I come before you today as the voice of humanity, a young species that has only recently joined the community of star-faring civilizations. She told them about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests and the billions of people who dreamed of a peaceful future among the stars. She told them about the colonies that humanity had built with hope and hard work. Small settlements on distant worlds where families had started new lives, and then she told them about the attacks. The Volnoxy hegemony has raided our colonies 17 times in the past 5 years. Elena said, her voice growing stronger with each word. They have killed over 12,000 of our people. They have taken prisoners who were never seen again. And they have claimed territory that humanity settled in good faith. She pulled up holographic images that floated above her podium, showing the burned remains of colony buildings, showing the faces of children who had been orphaned, showing the graves that stretched across fields where crops should have grown. We do not come here seeking war. Elena continued. We come here seeking justice. We come here seeking protection under the laws that govern this great council. She looked up at High Chancellor Zorvith and spoke directly to him. The Galactic Charter states that member species may not conduct unprovoked attacks against developing civilizations, and we ask that this charter be enforced. The chamber fell silent, and Elena could hear nothing but the sound of her own heartbeat as she waited for a fight. Responsiveth rose from his seat, his insectoid body unfolding to its full 8-foot height. And when he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like stones grinding together. The council has heard your petition, Ambassador Vasquez, and we will now deliberate. Elena was escorted to a waiting room where she sat for 3 hours, pacing back and forth while her assistants tried to remain calm when the doors finally opened and she was called back into the chamber. She could tell immediately that something was wrong. The Volnoxy delegation was smiling openly now, their sharp teeth visible, and several of the other chancellors would not meet her eyes. High Chancellor Zorvith spoke the words that would change the course of human history. The council has reviewed the evidence presented by the human delegation, and we have reached a decision. Elena held her breath. The petition for protection is denied, Zorvith announced. The territories in question fall within a disputed zone that the Volnoxy hegemony has claimed for over 2 centuries, and humanity's presence there constitutes an illegal occupation. Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Furthermore, Zorvith continued, humanity does not meet the requirements for provisional membership in the Galactic Council, and therefore the protections of the Charter do not apply. This is a death sentence, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. You are condemning my people to extinction. Zorvith's compound eyes showed no emotion as he responded. The council's decision is final. Ambassador, you may return to your homeworld. Elena walked out of that chamber with her heart turned to stone. And she did not cry because tears would not bring back the dead or protect the living. A council aide approached her in the corridor, a small gray-skinned creature with large eyes that darted nervously in every direction. Ambassador, he whispered, there is something you should know. Something the council does not want you to discover. He pressed a data chip into her hand and scurried away before anyone could see them together on the long journey back to Earth. Elena accessed that chip and learned the truth that burned itself into her memory. The Volnoxy had paid the council. They had bribed the high chancellors with rare minerals and ancient technologies. And in exchange, the council had agreed to look away while humanity was hunted. Her people had not been judged. They had been sold, and as the stars streamed past her window, Elena Vasquez made a silent promise that one day the council would answer for what they had done. 30 years of silence fell upon the galaxy like a heavy blanket. And during those long decades, the Galactic Council forgot about the small blue world called Earth. They forgot about the woman who had stood before them and begged for mercy. They forgot about the children whose faces she had shown them. And they forgot about the promise she had made in her heart. But humanity did not forget in the first years after Ambassador Vasquez returned home with the Council's betrayal burning in her mind. The Velnoxy attacks grew worse than anyone could have imagined. They came to the colony on Proxima Centauri during a harvest festival when families were gathered in the fields celebrating the abundance of their crops. And when they left, there was nothing but ash and silence. A young naval officer named James Chun was stationed on that world, and he had just enough time to push his wife and daughter into an escape pod before the Velnoxy soldiers found them. He watched through a window as reptilian hands dragged his family away. And the last thing he saw was his daughter's face, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth forming the word, "Daddy." Before the doors slammed shut, James Chun survived because the Velnoxy wanted survivors. They wanted someone to tell the other colonies what had happened. They wanted fear to spread like a disease through human space. He returned to Earth a broken man. But broken things can be rebuilt into something stronger. And James Chun dedicated every moment of his remaining life to a single purpose: revenge. The governments of Earth gathered in secret to discuss what could be done. And Ambassador Vasquez stood before them with the data chip that the Council aide had given her. "They sold us," she told the leaders of every nation. "They took Velnoxy bribes and condemned us to death. And the galaxy believes we are too weak to do anything about it." A Russian general slammed his fist on the table and demanded immediate retaliation. But Elena raised her hand for silence. "If we strike now, we will be destroyed," she said. "Our ships are toys compared to their fleets. Our weapons are sticks against their cannons. But we have something they do not expect." She paused and looked at each face around the table. "We have time. We have determination. And we have the element of surprise because they think we are already finished." That night, the leaders of Earth made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Every resource that could be spared would be directed toward a single goal. Every scientist and engineer would work on a single project. And the entire human race would unite in secret to build a force that could bring the Council to its knees. They called it Project Retribution. Deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland, they built the first research facility. And there the greatest minds in human history gathered to solve impossible problems. They studied captured Velnoxy, technology from crashed ships and reverse-engineered systems that alien species had spent thousands of years developing. Then they improved those systems in ways the galaxy had never imagined human. Creativity was something the Council had not accounted for. And while other species had grown comfortable with their ancient designs, humanity looked at alien technology and asked, "How can we make this better?" Within 5 years, they had developed engines that could jump between stars without using the G's. Councils monitored gate network, and this meant human ships could travel anywhere without being tracked within 10 years, they had created weapons that could bypass energy shields entirely, antimatter lances that could punch through the hulls of even the largest warships. Within 15 years, they had built shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt, protected by sensor-scrambling fields that made them invisible to any scanner the Council possessed. James Chun, now a vice admiral in the secret fleet, oversaw the construction of the warships that would carry humanity's vengeance to the stars. Each ship was given a name that remembered the fallen. The UES Proxima for his lost colony, the UES Harvest for the festival that became a massacre, the U's Remember for the promise that humanity would never forget. He stood on the observation deck of the orbital construction facility and watched as the flagship took shape. A massive vessel nearly 2 kilometers long with enough firepower to crack a planet. They named it the UES Remembrance. and it would carry Admiral Chun into battle when the time finally came. Meanwhile, the Velnoxi continued their attacks, growing bolder with each passing year because no one tried. To stop them, they raided the colony on New Shanghai and took 500 prisoners. For their hunting preserves, they destroyed the settlement on Kepler's Hope and left messages written in blood that mocked humanity's weakness. They attacked the research station on Miranda's world and killed every scientist who was working to find cures for diseases that plagued human colonies. Each attack was reported to the Council by the Velnoxi with pride, and each time the Council recorded humanity's losses with cold indifference. The human situation continues to deteriorate. High Chancellor Zorvith noted in an official report, extinction is projected within the next 2 decades. He was wrong in year 29 of the silence. The last human colony fell to a Velnoxi assault, and the reptilian High Lord Vexthos declared to the galaxy that humanity was extinct. The hunting grounds are now closed, he announced with a cruel smile. But we have claimed the human homeworld as a nature preserve, and in 100 years, when their population is recovered, our grandchildren will enjoy the sport of hunting them once again. The Council congratulated the Velnoxi on their successful campaign, and several members sent gifts to High Lord Vexthos as a sign of respect. Earth received no more visitors after that, and the galaxy turned its attention to other matters. Confident that the human problem had been solved forever, they could not have been more wrong. In the asteroid belt, the final ship of the Retribution fleet rolled off the construction line, bringing the total to 400 warships, crewed by men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Admiral James Chun, now 63 years old, with a face carved from stone and eyes that held 30 years of grief, stood on the bridge of the UES Remembrance and looked at the tactical display showing his fleet: 400 ships, 20,000 Marines in powered armor, and enough weapons to burn civilizations. The Ash Ambassador Elena Vasquez, now 82 but still sharp as a blade, sent a message from Earth that reached every ship in the fleet simultaneously. The Council believes we are dead, a voice said through the speakers. The Velnoxi believe they have won, but they have only awakened a sleeping giant and filled it with terrible resolve. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of every human who had died while the galaxy watched and did nothing. You carry with you the memory of 12 million souls who were murdered, while the Council counted their bribes. You carry the hope of 8 billion people who have worked and sacrificed for this moment. Admiral Chun listened with his hands clasped behind his back, and he thought of his daughter's face, forever frozen in his memory at 7 years old. Go now, Ambassador Vasquez said. Show them what humanity is capable of. Show them the price of betrayal. And show them that extinction is not our destiny but theirs. Admiral Chun turned to his communications officer and spoke 3 words that would echo through history. Launch the fleet. 400 jump drives activated simultaneously, tearing holes in the fabric of space. And in an instant, the Retribution fleet vanished from the solar system. The silence was over. Humanity had returned. The amber sky above Sethgard III blazed with celebration as the Velnoxi hegemony marked the 30th anniversary of their greatest victory. And High Lord Vexthos stood on the balcony of his palace, watching fireworks paint colors across the heavens. Below him, millions of his people filled the streets, their red scales gleaming under the lights, their voices raised in songs that praised the glory of the hunt and the extinction of the human prey. Vexthos was ancient by Velnoxi standards, nearly 200 years old, and he had personally led the final assault on the last human colony. He remembered the screams of the humans as his soldiers dragged them from their homes. He remembered the way they begged for mercy in their strange language, and he remembered the satisfaction of watching them realized that no help would ever come. Those memories brought him joy on nights like this. "My lord," said his military advisor, approaching the balcony with a communication device. "The Galactic Council sends their congratulations on this anniversary." Vexthos took the device and listened to the recorded message from High Chancellor Zorvith. Empty words of praise that meant nothing, but served to remind everyone that the Council had approved of what the Velnoxi had done. "Send them my thanks," Vexthos said, handing the device back, "and remind them that when the human homeworld is ready for hunting, we will extend invitations to any Council member who wishes to join us." He turned back to the fireworks and allowed himself to feel pride in all that he had accomplished. That was when the sky tore open. 400 points of light appeared simultaneously above the capital city, blazing like new stars being born. And for a moment, Vexthos thought it was part of the celebration. Then his military advisor screamed, "Ships! Unknown configuration!" They came from nowhere. Vexthos grabbed the communication device and connected to his orbital defense command. And the voice that answered was filled with terror. "My lord, we are tracking 400 warships. They bypassed our sensor grid entirely. They are human. The markings on their hulls are human." "Impossible," Vexthos hissed. "The humans are extinct. We killed them all." But even as he spoke those words, the first antimatter lances struck his orbital defense platforms, and massive explosions bloomed in the night sky like flowers of destruction. Admiral James Chun stood on the bridge of the U.E.'s Remembrance and watched the tactical display with cold satisfaction. As human weapons tore through Velnoxi defenses like they were made of paper. "Defense grid is down to 40%, reported his tactical officer. "Enemy warships are launching from the southern continent. Target them," Chine said, his voice calm despite the fire that burned in his heart. "All ships, engage enemy fleet." The Velnoxi had 200 warships stationed at their homeworld, vessels that had terrorized human colonies for decades. And they rose to meet the human fleet with weapons blazing. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Human ships moved in formations that the Velnoxi had never encountered, coordinating their attacks with precision that came from 30 years of training and preparation. The quantum destabilizers punched through Velnoxi shields like they did not exist, and the antimatter lances carved through their hulls before they could even return fire. Within the first hour, half of the Velnoxi fleet was burning wreckage falling through the atmosphere. "Admiral," said the communications officer, "we are receiving transmissions from the Velnoxi command. They are asking for terms of surrender." Chun did not hesitate. "Tell them there are no terms," he said. "Tell them we remember Proxima Centauri. We remember New Shanghai. We remember every colony they burned and every person they murdered." He paused, and his voice grew harder than steel. "Tell them extinction has come for the hunters on the surface of Sethkar III." High Lord Vexthos watched his orbital platforms explode one after another. And for the first time in his long life, he felt something he had never experienced. Before fear, he tried to contact the Galactic Council, tried to call for help from the allies who had supported his campaign against humanity. But the human ships were jamming all communications. "How is this possible?" he whispered to himself. They were primitives. They had nothing. How did they build this fleet? The answer came from the sky as human. Dropships descended through the atmosphere like a swarm of angry insects, each one carrying Marines-empowered armor that made them look like metal giants. They landed in the heart of the capital city, and the Velnoxi soldiers who tried to stop them learned that human weapons worked just as well on the ground as they did in space. The Marines moved through the streets with ruthless efficiency, their battle suits shrugging off Velnoxi weapons while their own guns tore through anything that stood in their way. Sergeant Maria Santos led her squad toward the palace, stepping over the bodies of Velnoxi soldiers who had thought humans were weak prey. Palace is in sight, she reported to her commanding officer. Resistance is crumbling. Copy that, Sergeant, came the reply. Admiral Chun wants the High Lord taken alive. He has plans for that one. Maria smiled grimly beneath her helmet and pushed forward. Hi. Lord Vextos tried to flee through the tunnels beneath his palace. But human sensors tracked his heat signature, and a squad of Marines was waiting when he emerged. He fought, because the Velnoxi were warriors, and surrender was not in their nature. But his ancient body was no match for humans in powered armor. They dragged him from the tunnel and forced him to his knees. And when he looked up, he saw human faces staring down at him with expressions that held no mercy. You should be dead, Vextos snarled. Your species should be extinct. The Marine who held him leaned close and spoke in a voice that was almost gentle. We were. For 30 years, we were ghosts, and now we have come back to haunt you. The battle lasted 6 hours in total. And when it ended, the Velnoxi hegemony had ceased to exist as a military power. Their fleet was destroyed. Their orbital infrastructure was slag. And their capital city was under human occupation. Admiral Chun descended to the surface on a shuttle and walked through streets that were littered with the aftermath of battle. And everywhere he went, Velnoxi civilians cowered and hid. He did not order attacks on civilians, because humans were not monsters like the Velnoxi had been. But he made sure that every one of them saw the symbol on his uniform, the symbol of Earth. The world they had planned to turn into a hunting preserve, High Lord Vextos, was brought before him in the central plaza of the capital, forced to kneel in the same place where he had once displayed human prisoners as trophies. Do you remember me? Chun asked quietly. Standing over the ancient reptile of Vextos, looked up with hatred in his golden eyes, but did not speak. I was at Proxima Centauri, Chun continued. I watched your soldiers take my wife and my daughter. I watched them drag my family away while your ships burned everything I loved. He knelt down so he could look directly into the High Lord's eyes. My daughter was 7 years old. She called out for her daddy, and I could not save her. Vextos showed no remorse, only contempt. They were prey, he said. Prey exists to be hunted. Chun stood up and turned away. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the plaza through speakers that every Velnoxi could hear. The Velnoxi hegemony is finished. Your military is destroyed. Your government is dissolved. And your High Lord will face justice for his crimes. He activated a communication channel that broadcast on every frequency the Council could receive. This message is for High Chancellor Zorvith and every member of the Galactic Council. Chun announced, humanity remembers your betrayal. We remember how you took bribes and sold our people to monsters. And we remember empty word you spoke while our colonies burned. He paused and let the silence stretch across the light years. The Velnoxi were only the beginning. We are coming for all of you, and when we arrive, you will answer for what you have done. He ended the transmission and turned to his officers. Secure the prisoner and prepare for the next phase. The Council has had 30 years to enjoy their bribes. His voice grew cold as ice. That time is over now. Panic spread through the Galactic Council like wildfire consuming dry grass. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the ancient halls of Thaurix Prime echoed with the sounds of true fear. High Chancellor Zorvith called an emergency session, summoning representatives from all 12 member species to address the impossible news that had arrived from Velnoxi space. The reports must be wrong, insisted Chancellor Morvith of the Vexian Empire, her crystalline body trembling with agitation. The humans were extinct. We have records confirming their complete elimination. The records are wrong, replied Admiral Kethvorn of the Groth Collective, his massive form hunched over the tactical display. I have verified the transmissions personally. The Velnoxi homeworld has fallen. Their fleet is destroyed. And human warships are broadcasting demands across every frequency. The chamber erupted into chaos as Council members shouted accusations and demands, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of terror and rage. Zerv raised his forearms and called for silence. But for the first time in his long tenure as High Chancellor, the Council did not immediately obey. Enough, he finally bellowed, his insectoid voice cutting through the noise like a blade. We must respond with strength, not panic. He turned to the military advisors who stood along the walls of the chamber. How many ships can we assemble? Admiral Kethvarn consulted his datapad and reported with grim determination. If all 12 species contribute their available forces, we can gather approximately 1,200 warships at the Nexus Corridor within 10 standard days. The humans have only 400 ships, Zorvith calculated. We will outnumber them 3-1. Surely that will be enough to crush this rebellion. He did not understand how wrong he was. The order went out to every Council species, demanding that all available military forces converge on the Nexus Corridor, the strategic choke point that controlled access to the inner regions of Council spaceships arrived from a dozen worlds. Ancient vessels that had maintained galactic order for millennia, crewed by species who had never known true defeat. The Cathari sent 200 ships with hulls like black mirrors. The Vexians contributed 150 vessels of living crystal that could regenerate from damage. Groth arrived with their massive dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small moon one. By one, the other species added their forces until the combined Council armada filled space like a wall of metal and fire. Admiral Kethvarn stood on the bridge of his flagship and surveyed the assembled fleet with satisfaction. Let the humans come, he said to his officers. They will break against us like waves against a mountain. 3 days later, the human fleet arrived. They emerged from jump space in perfect formation. 400 ships against 1,200. And any observer would have thought the battle was already decided. Admiral James Shun studied the enemy formation on his tactical display and felt nothing but cold determination. They have positioned themselves in a standard defensive screen, his tactical officer reported. Classic Council doctrine. They expect us to come at them in a direct assault. Then we will not do what they expect, Chun replied. Signal all ships. Execute Formation Tempest. The human fleet split apart like a flower opening its petals, ships accelerating in different directions at speeds that should have been impossible. The Council commanders watched in confusion as the humans refused to engage in the straightforward battle they had prepared for. What are they doing? Demanded Admiral Kethvarn. They are running away. He was wrong again. The human ships were not running. They were positioning themselves in a three-dimensional web that surrounded the Council armada, and before the enemy could react, they struck from every direction simultaneously. Antimatter lances crossed the void like spears of light, piercing Council shields that were supposed to be impenetrable. Quantum destabilizers disrupted the molecular bonds of enemy hulls, causing entire sections of ships to simply fall apart, and everywhere the Council forces tried to concentrate their fire, the human ships were already gone, jumping short distances to appear somewhere else entirely. Impossible, Kethvarn shouted as explosions bloomed across his tactical display. They cannot jump inside a battle zone. The gravitational interference alone should tear their ships apart. But human engineers had solved that problem years ago, developing systems that could calculate microjumps in real time, allowing their ships to dance around enemy fire like phantoms. The Battle of Nexus Corridor lasted 3 hours, and it became the most one-sided engagement in galactic history when it was over. Less than 200 Council ships remained, scattered and fleeing in every direction, and the human fleet had lost only 17 vessels. Admiral Chun sent a message to the survivors. Return to your homeworlds and tell them what happened here. Tell them that humanity has returned, and tell them that we are not finished. The news of the disaster reached Thaurix Prime before the surviving ships did. And High Chancellor Zorvith felt his world crumbling around him. He tried to flee, tried to take a ship and disappear into the vastness of space. But human marines intercepted him at the spaceport. They brought him back to the council chamber in chains, along with every other High Chancellor who had voted to deny humanity's petition. 30 years ago, Ambassador Elena Vasquez had traveled with the fleet, determined to see this moment with her own eyes. And now she walked into the chamber, where her hopes had been crushed 3 decades earlier. The room looked different with human soldiers lining the walls and the 12 High Chancellors sitting in chains where they had once judged the galaxy. Elena was 82 years old now, her hair completely white and her face marked by time, but her eyes were as sharp as they had ever been. She walked to the central podium, the same place where she had stood as a younger woman begging for help that never came. And she looked up at those who had betrayed her people. 30 years ago, I stood in this exact spot, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I showed you images of dead children. I told you about families torn apart. And I asked for justice. She paused and let the silence stretch. You gave me nothing but lies and empty words. You took Velnoxy bribes and sold my people to be hunted like animals. And you recorded our suffering in your official documents with less emotion than you would show for a weather report. High Chancellor Zorvith tried to speak, to offer excuses or explanations, but Elena raised her hand. I am not interested in your words. I have heard enough of your words to last a lifetime. She placed a data chip on the podium, the same chip that a council aide had pressed into her hand so long ago. This contains evidence of every bribe, every secret deal, every species you have condemned to death or slavery for your own profit. And this evidence will be released to every civilization in the galaxy. She looked at each of the 12 High Chancellors in turn. The Galactic Council is dissolved, effective immediately. Your authority is revoked. Your laws are void. And your legacy will be remembered as one of corruption and cruelty. Chancellor Morvith of the Vexians found her voice. You cannot do this. We have governed the galaxy for 3,000 years. There will be chaos without us. Elena smiled. And there was no warmth in it. You governed the galaxy for yourselves. You maintained order only when it served your interests. And you crushed anyone who threatened your power. She gestured to the human soldiers around the chamber. There will be a new order now. One that does not sell young species to monsters. One that does not accept bribes to look away from genocide. Admiral Chun entered the chamber and approached the podium, standing beside the woman whose grief had sparked humanity's transformation. High Chancellor Zorvith, he said, you are charged with conspiracy to commit genocide, corruption of justice, and crimes against humanity. How do you plead? Zorvith's compound eyes reflected the light as he stared at his captors. I was following council protocols. The Velnoxy were valued members. Humanity was not. That is not a plea, Chun replied. But it tells us everything we need to know about you. He turned to his officers. Take them to holding cells. They will face trial for their crimes before representatives of every species they have wronged. As the former High Chancellors were led away, Elena Vasquez remained at the podium, looking out at the empty chamber that had witnessed both humanity's greatest humiliation and its ultimate triumph. Did you ever imagine we would be here? Chan asked quietly. Standing beside her, Elena shook her head slowly. I imagined it every single day. I imagined standing here and showing them that they were wrong about us. She turned to face him. And for the first time in 30 years, she allowed herself to feel something other than determination. But I never imagined it would cost so much. Chun nodded, understanding perfectly. They had won, but victory could not bring back the dead, could not heal the wounds that the galaxy had inflicted on humanity. All they could do now was build something better. something that would ensure no other species would ever suffer as they had suffered. The trial would come later, and justice would be served. But first there was work to do. Send word to Earth, Elena said. Tell them the council has fallen, and tell them to prepare. She looked out through the crystal windows at the stars beyond. The real work is about to begin. The galaxy held its breath and waited for humanity to become the new tyrants. Every species that had lived under council rule expected the worst, because they had seen empires rise and fall before. And the pattern was always the same. The strong would crush the weak, the victors would enslave the defeated, and the cycle of suffering would continue under a different flag. They expected human fleets to descend on their worlds demanding tribute. They expected human soldiers to march through their cities, enforcing compliance. They expected to trade one master for another. And many species began preparing for resistance or submission. Depending on their nature, they were wrong about everything. Admiral James Chun stood before an assembly unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 300 species gathered on the neutral world of New Horizon, a planet that humanity had chosen specifically because it belonged to no one. These were not the powerful species who had dominated the council. These were the forgotten ones, the oppressed ones, the civilizations that had been exploited or ignored or targeted for extinction. The Volmari were there, a peaceful people whose homeworld had been strip-mined by council corporations. The Thesic attended, refugees from a world the council had allowed to be conquered for political convenience. The Grenth came despite their fear, a species so small in number that the council had classified them as not worth protecting. Hundreds of others filled the Great Hall, species whose names the council had never bothered to learn. And they all watched the human admiral with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Chen looked out at the assembled representatives and spoke words that would reshape galactic civilization. You expected us to become conquerors, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. You expected us to take revenge on everyone who failed to help us, to build an empire on the ashes of the council. He paused and shook his head slowly. That is not why we fought. That is not why we spent 30 years in darkness, building a fleet that could shake the stars. He stepped forward, away from the podium, closer to the assembled species. We fought because we wanted to survive. We fought because we wanted justice. And we fought because we wanted to create something better than what existed before. A murmur ran through the assembly, uncertainty mixed with desperate hope. The council was corrupt because it gave power only to those who already had it. Chum continued. It protected the strong and sacrificed the weak. It accepted bribes and called it diplomacy. It watched genocide and called it policy. His voice grew stronger with each word. We are offering something different. A true alliance where every species has a voice. Where protection is guaranteed, not purchased. Where justice applies to all equally. He gestured to the human delegation behind him. Men and women who had survived the darkest period in human history. We call it the Terran Accord. And membership is open to any species that agrees to its principles. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, frail now but still sharp as ever, rose from her seat and walked to stand beside Chen. I remember standing before the council and begging for help, she said, her voice thin but clear. I remember showing them images of our dead children and being told that our lives did not matter. She looked across the assembly at the hundreds of species who had experienced similar dismissal. Many of you have known that feeling. Many of you have been told that you are too small or too weak or too unimportant to deserve protection. She smiled, and warmth reached her eyes for the first time in decades. The Terran Accord will never tell you that. If you are attacked, we will defend you. If you are wronged, we will seek justice. And if you have a grievance, you will be heard. A representative of the Volmari. A tall being with silver skin and 3 eyes stood to speak. Your words are beautiful. But the council spoke beautiful words as well. How can we trust that you will be different? It was a fair question. And Chun answered it honestly. You cannot trust us based on words alone. Trust must be earned through actions. But I can tell you this. He reached into his uniform and pulled out a small photograph. Worn and faded from 30 years of being carried close to his heart. This is my daughter. Her name was Sarah. And she was taken by the Velnoxy when she was 7 years old. He showed the photograph to the assembly. And the projection systems enlarged it so everyone could see the small human girl with dark hair and bright eyes. I spent 30 years fighting so that no other father would have to watch his child be taken. No other mother would have to hear her family scream. No other people would have to stand alone against those who wished them harm. His voice did not waver, though the pain in his eyes was clear to all. If we become tyrants, if we become what we fought against, then Sarah died for nothing. And I will not allow that. He put the photograph away and looked directly at the Volmari. Representative, judge us by our actions. Hold us accountable to our promises, and if we fail to live up to them, you have every right to walk away. The Volmari considered for a long moment, then slowly nodded. My people will join the Terran Accord, she announced. May we never regret this choice. One by one, other species rose to declare their participation, until more than 200 civilizations had committed themselves to the new alliance. But the galaxy still had questions about what would happen to the former council species. The 12 powers that had dominated everything for so long, Chan, addressed this directly. The species of the former council will not be destroyed or enslaved, he said. Such actions would make us no better than they were. A rumble of discontent rose from some quarters. Species who had suffered directly under council rule and wanted revenge. I understand your anger, Chun acknowledged, but vengeance creates nothing. It only perpetuates the cycle of violence that brought us here. He explained the plan that humanity had developed. The former council species would be stripped of their military power and their political authority. But their people would be allowed to live in peace. Their leaders, those who had directly participated in corruption and injustice, would face trials before representatives of every species they had wronged. High Chancellor Zorvith has already been found guilty of conspiracy to commit genocide, China announced. His sentence is not death, because death is too easy. Too quick. He described Zorvith's fate with grim satisfaction. He will spend the rest of his life on a human colony world, helping to rebuild what his decisions helped to destroy. And every day he will see the faces of the people he condemned. Similar sentences were handed down to other council leaders, forcing them to witness the consequences of their actions and contribute to healing the wounds they had created. But one case was handled differently. High Lord Vexthos of the Volnoxy, the architect of humanity's near extinction, was brought before a special tribunal unlike Zorvith, who had been corrupt from a distance. Vexthos had personally led hunting parties against human civilians, had personally ordered massacres, had personally taken joy in human suffering. The Volnoxy killed 12 million of our people over 3 decades, the prosecutor stated. I, Lord Vexthos, commanded many of those operations personally. The tribunal consisted of representatives from humanity and from other species that the Volnoxy had victimized after 3 weeks of testimony. Vexthos was found guilty on over 9,000 counts of murder, genocide, and crimes against sentient beings. His sentence was announced by Admiral Chun himself. I, Lord Vexthos, is remanded into the custody of the families of those who died at Proxima Centauri. Vexthos was taken away, and the records do not indicate what happened to him after that. Some things are left unwritten for good. Reason 6 months after the fall of the Council, the Terran Accord held its first official assembly on New Horizon. Now designated as the capital of the new alliance, more than 300 species attended. each one with an equal voice, regardless of their size or power. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, now 83 years old, was chosen as the first speaker of the Accord, a position she accepted with humility. "I never wanted power," she told the assembly. "I only wanted justice." And justice has finally been achieved. She looked out at the gathered representatives, species of every shape and form, united by a common hope. "We have built something new here, something the galaxy has never seen. An alliance based not on fear but on mutual respect. Not on dominance but on shared protection." Her voice grew soft but carried clearly through the hall. "Let us never forget what brought us to this moment. Let us honor the dead by protecting the living. And let us prove to the universe that there is a better way." The assembly rose in applause that transcended species and language on Earth. Monuments were built bearing the names of every human who had died during the 30 years of darkness. 12 million names carved into walls of black stone that stretched for miles out. The center of the new capital stood a statue of Ambassador Vasquez, her hand outstretched toward the stars, and at its base an inscription read, "We asked for peace. We were given war. We returned the favor, and then we built something better." Admiral James Chun retired from active service and spent his remaining years on a quiet farm where he could watch the sunset and remember his daughter every year on the anniversary of Proxima Centauri. He would take out the worn photograph and speak to Sarah as if she could hear him. "We did it. Sweetheart," he would say, "we made them pay. And we made sure it will never happen to anyone else." And somewhere among the stars,